afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. Happy lunchtime.
What's going on with your face, Colin?
I don't know. There's the bit of the blind exactly where I'm sat, actually, that is the light is shining through. So I'm not actually, there we go. Maybe if I do it like that, it's a bit better. Welcome. Obviously, at this time on a Friday, we'd usually be dissecting a press conference or some lines from David Wagner, but obviously a free weekend for Norwich City because of Birmingham City's progress in the FA Cup fourth round. And we have other matters to discuss, be it transfers, be it shares, be it all of the different elements. We're going to try and bring them together for you in the next 40 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes or so. Of course, whatever platform you're watching this on, if you've got any questions or comments for myself and the man to my right, your left, as you're watching this, Paddy, Davitt, do get them in, and we'll do our best to answer them, be it on any of the subjects that we're going to talk about. Pad, I guess it probably makes sense for us to start at the news this morning that Norwich City have announced another general meeting. I don't know if this is some sort of record for general meetings in a year, but this is certainly the second or third that we've had. And it is going to take place on February the 13th. I'm just actually trying to find the statement so I can read it for you.
I was going to say, while you're doing that, Connor, yeah, I mean, Sam Seaman, our colleague, has done both that story and a bit of an explainer. So if you haven't already, I'd advise you, while you're watching this, obviously, for the next 40 minutes, but Pinken, either app or brand sites. There's two pieces on there now related to that news, I think, which the club put out about 8 a.m. But you've obviously got the actual club statement there, Connor. So. Yeah,
so I'll read it. It's a relatively brief statement, but actually what's behind it is quite substantial. So we'll go into some detail about that. But this is what the club released at, I think it was 8 o'clock this morning, wasn't it? It said Norwich City have issued a notice to club shareholders for a general meeting on Monday, February the 13th. The general meeting has been a call to allot a number of shares as the club seeks to strengthen its financial sustainability by reducing the need for borrowings. Shareholders are welcome to attend the meeting, but given its anticipated short length, are also encouraged to vote via proxy. Further information will follow once the formal business of the meeting has been concluded. And obviously, throughout the morning, there have been various little bits that have been dropping. Subsequently, literally dropping on people's doorsteps are the resolutions in terms of of that meeting, where we've learnt that the club are hoping to grant a resolution that would essentially allow them to create 194,000 or over 194,000 shares, which has lots of implications, which we'll try and delve into. And I can see already lots of comments in. But Pat, as a kind of situation, given everything that's happened in the last 6 months or so with Mark Atanasio, a very, very interesting and significant development this morning.
It is, but I mean, both what we're going to say now and obviously what Sam has put in the pieces that are already on there, essentially what you've alluded to there or read out there from the club is a procedural hurdle, as the previous one was. There's no reference to an Atanasio group or any group or any semblance in what the club have put out today that there is some actual identifying elements, but we all know the context. We all know that when they did this prior to Christmas, it was the precursor to essentially two things. Mark Atanasio, formally appointed to the board, having conducted that successful private shareholder transaction with Michael Folger and family, one or two other minor shareholdings. And also at that previous general meeting was the creation of that vehicle, those C preference shares, which allowed £10 million worth or up to £10 million worth to be invested into the club. So, and that clearly was to deepen the relationship with the Atanasio group, we'll call them that. And, in that context, for me, this is the news this morning is another link in that chain that, we're now moving to a deeper and ever deepening partnership, I think, is how it certainly from the American end, they would like to describe it. And this is just another step in the chain. But at this stage, what we're discussing today off the back of the club statement is just another procedural framework being put in place to clearly recalibrate the shareholding in terms of the current mix, with a view, clearly, if we overlay the context of everything that we know that's gone on in the last, formally probably last 7-8 months, but maybe over the past year, that there is a group based in the US who have looked at Norwich City, like what they see, and want to work with the existing ownership, the existing executive, to maybe deepen that relationship. And this is another hurdle that has to be cleared, maybe for that relationship to go to another level. But again, I think it's more of a signal that all the parties are very happy with how the initial relationship is developing, both in terms of the financial element, the way they're working collaboratively. The Atanasio group were here. Was it Middlesbrough game?
Yeah.
I lose track.
November.
Yeah, and did a bit of media and made it quite clear that they are fully invested, want to deepen that relationship. They've been quite astute for me in that they haven't put themselves front of house. They've in the background tried to learn the business, because it is a business. Ultimately, they're very clear, and they've said it in their public pronouncements. They don't really know too much about football/soccer. They have to learn about that side of it. But what they do have is this wealth of sports ownership background that they can draw on. They feel clearly from those interviews there's a lot of crossover potential, and a lot of the expertise that they've got can apply to Norwich City. So where we're at, I think today is another visible step that this relationship is deepening. But obviously with the caveat that all we've heard today is that there is a meeting now in the diary, and at that meeting, the proposal is, as you've read it out, Connor, to sort of again create another 200,000 or so, 195,000 or so ordinary shares. But it remains to be seen if that is for the Atanasio group. But given what we know, I think it's a fair assumption.
Yes, and that is worth highlighting as well. So if it is the creation of new shares, which I think is probably the most likely outcome, I think there could be some rejigging of shares. That could technically happen, but I think it's far more likely that we'll see a situation where new shares are created. So it would take the number of ordinary shares at the moment from 616,000, just about 617,000, to 812,000. Sorry, so that's quite a substantial increase. It's essentially 24% worth of shares. They're ordinary shares we're talking about here. Obviously, Mark Atanasio invested in C preference shares earlier on in the season, which later down the line can be converted into ordinary shares. I know it's very confusing and maybe for some people a little bit dry, but it is significant. And essentially what that means was, if you want to go down the track of speculation, which a lot of people will obviously be doing this morning, would essentially mean that everyone who has a share in Norwich City, whether you have one or whether, like Dealer and Michael, you have a 53%, they become diluted, because obviously the amount of shares are now more. So it would essentially take Dealer and Michael, if all of that shareholding was taken on by one person, would take them from about 53% to about 40% in probably the best case, or the most obvious scenario. If it was their Mark Atanasio, he would then take up 36%. So even though Dealer and Michael would have the most shares, they wouldn't be the majority shareholders because they don't own the majority of shares. Hopefully that's in a little bit of plain English for you. But Paddy, it's the kind of, and we've been speaking about this since we broke this news in May it was now, that there was interest, that it did feel like there was a kind of roadmap and a situation where we could end up where either Mark Atanasio had a controlling stake in Norwich City, or certainly a majority stake, or certainly a much more powerful say than perhaps a lot of people have had in terms of Dealer and Michael's stewardship before. It does feel like we are now heading even further down the road in terms of that is, and again, we must stress we're speculating, if it is Mark Atanasio that does pick up those shares.
Well, I mean, just as you're talking there, Connor, we are obviously getting questions off the back of this about, which we discussed before we went live, the 30% threshold. We'll probably, I'll throw that one back to you because you can explain that in a bit more detail. But the price for these potential new shares being created, which obviously has to be voted on first. So all of those questions are obviously hypothetical at the moment. So, there isn't going to be a value attached to those shares, certainly not one that's made public at this stage. Essentially where we're at is, to reiterate, and it is quite dry, but it is the procedural hurdles that can get us to that point, whereby I think it says in the resolution that's gone out today, they've got to the 20, I'm going to figure off to 28th, is it, of February? If the resolution is passed first and foremost at the general meeting, to then trigger that creation of shares, purchase of shares. But on the 30% point, Connor, what was it you were saying to me about that just before we went live?
Yes. So again, a little bit of a dry point and a little bit of quite a technical point as well. So let's again, we are down the road of speculation. Worth us keep clarifying that. But if an individual, Mark Attanasio, probably in the case that we're talking about, was to take over 30% of a share in Norwich City, once that threshold is reached, he's then obligated to offer existing shareholders, so that's anyone from 1 to however many shares in the business, equivalent terms to acquire their shares. Of course, they're not obligated to accept, and in that situation, it wouldn't mean that those funds then got funneled into Norwich City. It would kind of be like we've seen with Michael Folger, kind of this individual transaction where money would change hands between both parties, whereas the allotment would inject new cash into Norwich City. That is the idea, and I think that's hinted at in the club statement when they talk about kind of strengthening their own financial position and taking off the pressure to borrow. So hopefully that makes sense. So if you are a shareholder and if this situation does come to pass, I don't know how formally this thing's happen. I would guess it would be a form of a letter. There would be an offer from Mark Attanasio, again, if that situation occurred in that hypothetical situation, to acquire your shares, you're not obligated to accept. So again, a really interesting element and a really interesting dynamic, because if that situation does play out and those percentages that we've kind of discussed do become reality, you've got pretty much a partnership there, haven't you, really, in terms of who would be running Norwich City. There wouldn't be a clear majority shareholder, which is a completely fascinating dynamic given the 25 years that we've had at this football club.
And on that point, and it is worth stressing, again, within this hypothetical discussion we're having today. But
we're in utopia, so that makes it nice.
But that point that it isn't, this isn't a vehicle like it was for the Folger Attanasio group transaction, which was a private shareholding. This is very much, something that the majority shareholders you would have to feel, given that this is all coming under the club's banner in terms of rolling out this confirmation of a general meeting. And of course, they would have to vote for that resolution as a shareholder with one share would have to. But it all, I think, underlines that this is with the agreement. This isn't, whether it's football or any business, when you hear about takeovers or ownership, you hear hostile takeovers or whatever. This couldn't be further from that. What we have is a very collaborative relationship developing, and today's news to me reaffirms that all parties are very happy with the speed it's moving at, the direction it's moving at. But clearly, there are a lot of stakeholders involved. It isn't just about the ones with the most shares, hence why they have to go down this general meeting format. But to go back to what happened in September, that motion was carried pretty much lock stock when Delia and Michael's shares were moved in the direction of accepting those resolutions. That would be the same again next month. So, clearly, I think it underlines again, whatever you feel about those two in terms of their wealth and how the club has been driven, the direction it's been driven, that what they're doing now is all about that custodianship and that passing it on, whenever that might be, whatever format that takes, into the hands of people, group who have the best interest of the club at heart and are rooted in the values that they feel are the core values of this club that they've tried to instill over this 25 years. And the way that this is now playing out, it's clear to see that is the case, that, they're not in it to sort of ride off into the sunset with a swag bag of many millions or tens of millions. This is very much about what they've always been saying, that they are essentially caretakers. I think that's the phrase they've used before, and that they want to pass it on to a set of individuals, family, who also have the mid and longer term health of the football club at its core. And of course, they look at a group who have been 18 years now involved with the Brewers, who, it's worth reiterating now in terms of this conversation, Mark Attanasio made it quite clear that they took it on from a family-owned business before, the Selig family, and that they worked closely with the Seligs during that transition period. And I think even for years afterwards, I think that first interview Mark Attanasio gave when the club went out to Milwaukee, and he said, I'm still in weekly contact with the Seligs. And this was years after they'd actually ceded ownership to the Attanasio group. That, to me, the parallels are very obvious with how this is playing out now. So, fundamentally, this is another signal from the majority owners of this club that they're willing to do what's right for the club, not what's right for them as individuals, ultimately.
Yeah, because the easy transaction would be just to sell their shares, and
Absolutely.
as you say, just to disappear, and then it's kind of not their problem anymore, isn't it? So this is, and we've seen that with some ownership in other football clubs that maybe haven't gone well for that reason, because these parties have come in and maybe even sometimes had the right intentions, but maybe had that lack of knowledge of exactly how to do it. If you are a Mark Attanasio, or if you are part of his group, why wouldn't you want to lean on someone with 25 years experience of doing what it is that you want to do? But eventually you probably do want to drive the car instead of having a passenger seat. So it's going to be interesting to see how this transpires, or the bus. Yeah, if you want to go down that one. There's plenty more, as Paddy said, on pinken.com if you want to read a bit more into this. Of course, if you've got any questions, we'll do our best to answer them, although it can be a little bit complex at times to really dig into various matters. But hopefully we've covered kind of the overarching themes, and that probably leads us nicely to go on to transfers, because I can already see there's lots and lots of comments and questions about that. So let's start with the obvious one, Pad, then, in terms of incomings, which I think is probably the place to start, because there's not long now to go in the window. I think it is a few days.
Tuesday week.
Tuesday, yeah.
Tuesday week.
11,
oh no, sorry, this Tuesday, yeah.
This Tuesday, at 11 p.m. that deadline slams shut, or is in Norwich's case probably more is gently pushed, and then someone puts the latch on at the end of the night to shut it. It has been quiet. It's been quiet all month. I think Stuart Webber and David Wagner have both alluded to the fact that it probably would be like this. Yeah. What's kind of your feeling in the remaining 4 full days that we have after today? Are you anticipating anything that says to you that Norwich City will bring in fresh recruits?
Well, I think you asked me and Sam on the most recent podcast, which was Sunday morning. We recorded it here at our HQ, whether they would do something. I felt they might still do one off the back of David Wagner speaking to us the day before, making it clear that, okay, I've got some clear water now. The Birmingham game's gone. I've got 2 weeks. I'm going to sit down. This was David Wagner, to paraphrase him, with Stuart, with Neil Adams, and just assess now and give himself that space. And of course, he's now had 2 league games, multiple training sessions to really do what he said he needed to, which was assess what he already had in the building. I felt he was speaking like a man who might just not, as he said to us before the Coventry game, he's not going to close any doors, of course, but he might investigate potentially the wide area, which was the glaring omission for me now that Jolis, now that Rashica aren't coming back in this window. But 3 or 4 days on, we've seen the departures of Cantwell, Hugo, Sinani's getting linked. I think they would listen to offers for him. I think I've probably changed my mind now. No, I think it's going to be quiet now. I don't see anything unless something in terms of a major bid for one of their key players, which opens a whole different can of worms. But money that would be too good to turn down, which would force them to then react. Which is a scenario David Wagner did say, you have to be alive to at any point between now and the deadline, Tuesday night. But sat here right now, if that scenario didn't come to pass now, I think it's going to be a quiet one now. I think John Rose, a little bit earlier than anticipated return. He's out now training with the group. I think the original timeline was surgery early December. Best case scenario, two months from there. I think Dean Smith did say 2 to 3 months. That would have pretty much brought him back round about now. So I think Johnny Rowe coming back in, he's a player they really like, from what I'm led to believe, really like. I think there's been some feedback from people who were in and around the camp before David Wagner got into David Wagner that this is a player he could really enjoy working with, maybe even to the degree that he could come through and be a regular starter by the end of the season. That's how highly rated I think Johnny Rowe is. And if that is the case, that fitness-wise, he's back in the mix from sort of maybe post-Burnley onwards, it lessens completely the need to do anything in a wide area. So for me, that probably means, barring that scenario where there's an 11th hour bid comes in with serious funds for one of their higher-ranked assets that is too good to turn down financially, not talking about in terms of the football impact, but financially, I think it'll be a quiet one. Connor, I'll throw it on back to you. How do you see it between now and Tuesday, 11 o'clock?
Yeah, likewise. I think it's just Sinani, isn't it? And whether or not there's a move for him now, it feels, and obviously there might be some loans around the edges, but now that and we were kind of led to believe in in December or so, it probably would be a couple out, and the names who have ended up out are probably the ones that we maybe suspected it would be in terms of Cantwell and Jordan Hugill, and we'll come on to their departures in a minute. But certainly in terms of incomings, I mean, Stuart Webber did kind of outline it at the press conference where David Wagner was unveiled, where he said that they were kind of planning to do one with Dean Smith. I think he heavily alluded to the fact that was probably going to be a left back. Players have then returned from injury. Sam McCallum has come back. Dimi Yanulis is obviously back. Jakob Sorensen now covers a whole host of positions in defence and midfield. You talk about John Rowe coming back as well, and how much they like him, and that probably isn't a massive surprise, because I think he's been highly rated inside the club for a while. David Wagner has spoken about the academy more widely being full of quality, how he wants to work with a smaller squad. So all of those aspects, and that's before maybe you throw in the financial element of where Norwich City are at the moment, and the fact that January is a notoriously difficult window, not just to sign players in, but also to get value out of. And I think we've seen that as well. And sure, Norwich City could pluck a lone player from a Premier League club who maybe would give them a little bit of depth in wide areas. But then if you are a John Rowe, or if you are someone in the 23s, watching them bring in a lone player from another Premier League club, you're probably going, well, what does that say about my pathway? Probably not particularly positive. So I think that's what we'll see. The players we've seen, Hugill, Cantwell, depart, aren't necessarily what you would describe as frontline options, and as such probably don't need replacing in the same way that if it was, I don't know, let's pluck a name out of the team, Gabriel Sara or whoever, someone in the midfield or whatever, where you would need a direct replacement. I don't necessarily feel that they need that at the moment. And of course, the situation that they're in the Championship means that they are going to have to be a bit more fiscally responsible for where they are at this moment in time. And as someone else has pointed out, they've still got Shemek Poeta in the building as well, which is an interesting one to watch out on. So I think all of those factors combined probably mean that Norwich will most likely, not definitely, but most likely decide to go with what they've got. And I suspect, Pad, the kind of general consensus on that will be one of disappointment. There's been a lot of people feeling that they just need to add something else in wide areas. Obviously, David Wagner has got a lot out of Onel Hernandez and Kieran Dow since he's joined the club. There's been maybe some consistency issues with both. Do you kind of get that argument from some people that says if they'd have just added one in that area, it maybe would have helped them have a little bit of a boost in attacking areas?
Well, I mean, you've talked a lot there about that. You did a very good piece in the last day or two of mapping that out about almost the psychology of it. That you're a fan of a club, you see other clubs maybe in your division, maybe you feel might be competing for promotion, doing business, and it's almost like looking over the fence at what your neighbour's got kind of thing. But the reality is, take Dal, take Hernandez, take even Sara, and David Wagner has dramatically improved. I'm going to break off there, Connor, because you've got and this is where we're heading next. Yes. Well, we're wrapping this up in about 20 minutes because we're heading up to Colney to watch, I say ostensibly an under-21s game, but looking at that lineup, you reel that one off, Connor.
Yeah, there's a lot of first-team faces in here. Mate. So Norwich City's under-21s are playing Leeds this afternoon, 2:00 kickoff. So we're basically going to race from our office here in central Norwich to get to the training ground to watch this one. This is Norwich City's team. So they're going to play with Angus Gunn in goal. Flynn Clark is playing. Sam McCallum is playing. Brad Hills, Jaden Warner, Liam Gibbs plays. Jakob Sorensen plays. Daniel Sinani plays. Adam Eder plays, Marcelino Nunez plays, and Abu Kamara as well. So that is the first 11, which is pretty much a combined 11, isn't it? Really, a first-team options and 23s, and on the bench, Dixon, Peters, Watt, Stewart, McIntosh, and Brook. A very, very, very strong team. But seven first-teamers.
Sorry, Connor, let's cut across you, but that 11 there now that is going to take to the Colney playing fields in just under the hour does underline. Do Norwich actually need to do anything in terms of, because they're deficient? You know, that is got some very decent names in that 11, and that's a development essential game. So to me that reaffirms that the depth is there, and David Wagner clearly feels the depth is there, and as a result, you know, if you're not going to do anything in a wide area and you don't need to react to anything that happens in terms of a frontline player in a bid that's too good to turn down, why do you do anything? Why do you do anything? Because the evidence for the first two, and I know that the comeback might be, what if you get an injury? But then you're getting into hypothetical scenarios. And
what if you don't get an injury?
What if you don't? And the financial element of that. What about parking players who don't get a look in, like a Hugo? Let's be honest, on decent money. You know, financially that has to be a consideration as well. So, you know, I mean, I'm looking at some of the comments that have come in. Harry Wilson, I've seen that. I mean, that's a complete non-starter. Tony Frussell, I don't know if that's the legend that is Tony Frussell. It's Philip Heiser. I don't think he's coming back. I've seen Lucas Rupp. There was something Lucas Rupp did on social media. No, there'll be no Lucas Rupp coming either. There you go, Twitchy Terry. No, I don't think that's likely. So not unless he fancies a trip back to Norwich to see some friends. But no, is the reality. So we think it'll be pretty quiet inward. There might be the odd, fringe loan who go out. Paul Leeds is right because that does, I think, on this debate underline pretty conclusively that if you're David Wagner and ultimately his opinion is the one that matters, it would seem, whatever the financial elements of in terms of what they can or can't do, I think he is very content with the group of players he's working with now, and maybe doesn't feel that they need to go out and be proactive in these remaining 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, and he would have been aware of that, I'm sure, when he took the job earlier this month, and also and you kind of hinted on it earlier, and I wrote this in my piece. I think there's a culture now around football where you almost have to be seen to be doing something for the sake of doing something, when actually sometimes there is no need to do anything, and you can just go through a window and not sign anyone, and that's okay. Particularly in January, and there are a lot of clubs who are making additions, and a lot of those additions will work, some of them won't, and that's kind of the risk you take. But for Norwich City to essentially spend quite a bit of money on a loan, where there's a little bit of you could save that money and keep it in the summer, but also B, the stuff around the development, and also kind of what we spoke about there about the sheer number of options that they have in their group. It just doesn't feel particularly responsible for me to be going out and making a big addition. So that's where we think Norwich City are on incomings. We'll touch upon a couple of outgoings. Let's start with Todd Cantwell. I mean, so much has been said, Pad, and we've said quite a lot about it. So one thing I did want to ask you about was kind of the fee. There's been a lot of talk about maybe what Norwich City have got for Todd Cantwell. A lot of kind of reports maybe about what that fee might be. What kind of ballpark would you put it in? Because I think what was it, £1.5 million figure? That feels quite steep.
No. That's way million and a half I saw in the Scottish media. You put that to people at Norwich and they stifle the laughter. So ultimately, he was a player who was in the final not even 6 months of his current contract. He could go for nothing in the summer. Both him and Hugill, there's a saving of salary element to get them out the door now in this month. Yeah, there was reportedly 1 or 2 clubs in the Championship who had a look at him, maybe followed that up with some firm inquiries, but we don't know the exact figure, but nowhere near million and a half. So ultimately, I don't know how much of what remains in this 15-minute broadcast we'll give to the Todd Cantwell debate about whether he fulfilled potential or not. I mean, ultimately, I don't think there'll be anybody parked up at Carrow for 12 hours on deadline day with a yellow tie or not. But going back to Todd, I just hope now it's for me. It's now with an air of detachment, just following the guy's career. He's definitely got ability. He's got talent. I thought he spoke well, as he always has done, at his unveiling a couple of 3 days ago now. That really important phase of his career now. He thinks he's got a coach who believes in him and can see what he's all about and can get the best out of him. And if he does all that, then he can definitely kick on in his career again, and we'll see where it takes him. What I would say in terms of just popped into bed, you can be sure Stuart Webber is astute enough that there'll be attendant clauses in any deal that should that scenario play out and Cantwell's career goes like that again, that in terms of the finances that may accrue, it might not be about whatever has changed hands in the here and now. It could be performance related and sell on related as well. So, ultimately he's got the platform now, whatever you think about Scottish football more broadly, but Rangers is a massive club with a massive fan base. They will have European exposure. They will be contesting for trophies. He's got everything there in front of him now to re-energise his career, and good luck to him. Yeah,
and all I would say on the transfer fee is if you're Rangers, it probably doesn't hurt just to push that up slightly for various reasons. So that's all I would say on that. Jordan Hugill, which is a free transfer by all accounts to Rotherham United, which is kind of a few months earlier than what would have happened anyway when he would have left in the summer. David Wagner obviously said a couple of weeks ago, relatively, I think it was after the Preston game, wasn't it? So after his first league game in charge, that he didn't foresee a role for Jordan Hugill. You kind of mentioned the wage that he was on. he essentially had a choice, didn't he? Either he gets paid that amount of money, which he's entitled to, and he could have made that decision to sit at Norwich City for the rest of the season, or you go out and you sign a 3.5-year deal at Rotherham, probably for less money, but with more security and probably over the piece, what would be a similar amount of finance anyway. And obviously first team football. It feels that one like a really good move for him.
Oh, for all parties, yeah. I mean, ultimately, in terms of where we are now, not looking back at the contract that he's had to this point, but right now he's got 6 months less than slightly of a Norwich contract. That's not going to pay him what he's going to get now for 3.5 years, and that's security for him and his family. I've seen his first club interview with the Millers. He talked about the contract and the length, and almost that, from his point of view, is showing from Rotherham's point of view that they believe in him and that he can be a key figure for them. He wanted that financial security for him and his family. It gets him back, obviously, a lot nearer his Teesside roots. I'm sure that's pretty attractive, and he'll play regular football. And ultimately, as it was sort of intimated to me earlier in the week, if you're from people inside the club, if you're Jordan Hugill, what is in it for you now to sit at Carrow Road for the remaining 6 months when David Marlin has made it quite clear you're behind Pookie, you're behind Sargent, you're behind Eder. So you kick your heels for 6 months. Then you get to the summer, you're a free agent. There'll be plenty of free agents. He's the wrong side of 30 or just turned 30. He's not going to get the type of deal now that he would have got in the summer. So it makes complete sense for him to move on. And from Norwich's point of view, the financial saving in terms of his wages, David Wagner didn't feel football-wise he was going to be part of it. So shake hands, everybody goes their own way. And, I think it's a great move. It really is a great move for him as well. And as that last comment flashed up, people will debate in terms of what he offered on the pitch. But it was hard to edge out Teemu Pukki from the star billing, wasn't it? Ultimately, I think most strikers coming into the club in that period, certainly in the Farker era, we're going to find it very difficult to edge out Teemu Pukki. But he clearly did have a huge role to play in that second title win in terms of in and around the place, that phrase cultural architect. You speak to any of the people who were involved, either in the squad, his teammates, or around the group, what an important figure he was in that 2021 season. You can't underestimate it. And ultimately that got that club back to the Premier League, where they got access to tens and tens of millions again in another round of Premier League funding. So, anybody wants to say what a waste of money, I think it's all relative ultimately. In terms of looking at purely at his goals and his output and his minutes on the pitch. Hasn't worked out in that sense, but I think overall, you can't do anything other than wish him the best, because he was always whenever we dealt with him, a great individual to deal with. So yeah, much like Cantwell, really intrigued whether he can, as he said in his first club interview for Rotherham, he wants to get back to that player who got himself a move to the Premier League and West Ham. So whether he can do that at this stage of his career, it'll be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, and it also means he'll be coming back to Carrow Road later on the season. I'm sure, even though obviously that his feelings towards Norwich City, I'm sure he will be absolutely relishing that as well. And I'm sure he'll get a pretty good reception, because he was a popular figure by all accounts. It's not too dissimilar to maybe the role that Jordan Rhodes had, albeit Jordan Rhodes had one season, but he ended up being very positive and being very popular. Because it's quite a hard role when you're stuck behind someone like Teemu Pukki, who's just relentless in terms of their output, particularly at championship level, and the opportunities are so limited. It would be easy to throw toys out of the pram, particularly when you've been signed, handed the number 9 shirt. There's maybe a degree of expectation that you're going to get game time. He signed from a Premier League club as well in West Ham. He never did that, carried himself with real professionalism, real dignity, was very, very popular by all accounts. Went out on loan twice, had to come back, never moaned, never complained. Just got on with it, and I think that is probably why a lot of Norwich fans feel very warmly towards Jordan Hugill. There we go. I think we've managed to wrap everything up in about 34 minutes there. So hopefully that's good. Like I say, pinkin.com for plenty more content in terms of the news around the general meeting and what that could mean, the ramifications of that. We've got plenty more content coming across our channels as well, and of course, there we go. You've got that new bit there. Subscribe to Pinkin Plus today. There we go. I'm trying to work out whereabouts it was in relation to where I'm sat, but go and do that. You can get a month's free trial. Plenty of excellent content on there. Opinion analysis, Ewan Roberts' column, Chris Sutton's column, all of that good stuff as well. Right, we're off to Colney. We will maybe even see some of you down there. Thank you very much for watching. Happy Friday. Have a good weekend. We'll see you again very, very soon.